All right, good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on when and where you are watching this. This is our next lesson, Chapter 15, Lesson 2. We're going more on the system of laws in the United States, and I forgot my slide advancer. Hold on a second. All right, technical issues solved, hopefully. Yep, we're good to go. Hey, Abby, what do you think you see in this picture here?
A policeman with a dog going through school.
Yeah. We've learned already about the Fourth Amendment. Abby, do you remember at all what the Fourth Amendment might be about?
Search and seizure?
Exactly. Fourth Amendment's about searches and seizures. We are going to review a lot of the stuff we learned many months ago and putting what we've learned about the amendments in context of our legal system. Do you know who that is in the top left, my top left of that screen, your top right?
OJ?
Very famous case, even though it's happened a long time ago for your generation. This was a extraordinarily big, covered by the media, criminal case in the United States some time ago. And here, if you take a look at that in your slideshow, you can see that closer, of course. That is one example of a search warrant. Is a search warrant going to look the same everywhere you go? No. Every circuit, every part of our federal system have a slightly different looking search warrant, but that's an example of one. All right. Review some of the important protections we have that protect us, our liberty, our private property against the most powerful entity that we have to deal with, our own government. We have to be protected against our own government to protect our liberty. If we don't have these protections, let's face it, we're living in a monarchy or a dictatorship. These are written down in the Constitution and or the Bill of Rights. This is going to be a review for most of us, if you can remember back a few months back, but it's important stuff and it's good to see it again. All right, the first important thing is habeas corpus. It's Latin, and what's the Latin mean for habeas corpus?
You should have the body.
Habeas corpus is the basic protection that if the police snatch us up and arrest us, they can't just hold us in a hole somewhere. They can't just toss us in a jail or prison cell and leave us sit. The system is designed that the government has to put you in front of a judge, and at that point, you have a chance to know what charges you're being held for and argue for your freedom. Not in a trial sense, that's going to happen later, but this is the point where the government has to tell you your charges and you get that opportunity to maybe go out on bail. You'll regain your freedom at least temporarily until your trial date, because you're not typically supposed to be held in jail or prison until when? Until you've had that fair trial, you've gotten all your 4th, 5th, 6th Amendment rights, and you could be declared guilty, where you lose your freedom, or innocent, where you regain your freedom. But the most basic thing is habeas corpus. You have to be brought before a judge. The judge gets to review whether the police have real charges against you, and in that case, maybe be freed right away. Or if not, start the process of maybe getting bail and start the process of being assigned to a trial date. Bills of attainder. This is odd for us because we have these protections against them. But in English law, once upon a time, kings in Parliament would write legislation that would declare you guilty of crimes. You would have no trial at all. The king or the legislature would say, the Biankowski family, they're enemies of mine. I would love them all to go to jail because they threaten me. Maybe they want to be king. Maybe they believe their family line should be what's sitting on the throne. So they're a political enemy of mine. They really haven't done anything against the law, so if I arrest them and bring them before a trial, that would be awkward. But what I can do is have Parliament write a law against them. So these things were called bills of attainder. Parliament would say, all the Biankowskis and their land are forfeit to the king because everybody knows they're a bunch of traitors. So if you see any Biankowskis out there, you could lock them up, you could take their land, you could take their property, etc. So, our Constitution is specifically written that bills of attainder are illegal. Congress can't just sit there and write a law and say, yeah, guess what? We don't like this family or this group of people, because that happened in England too. Amongst the groups that the English government was prejudiced against, thought was a threat against them, was the Catholic Church and Catholics. So the king and parliament would write bills of attainder and write laws specifically geared towards Catholics, as they thought the Catholics posed a threat to the king and the crown. Ex post facto laws are also unconstitutional, written in the Constitution saying we cannot have ex post facto laws. Abby, what's an ex post facto law?
Criminal prohibitions?
Ex post facto laws are, I can't arrest you today for something that's illegal today but was legal yesterday. So if it's okay for Abby to wear a red t-shirt yesterday, it's illegal for her to wear a red t-shirt today. I can't arrest her for the fact that she was wearing a red t-shirt yesterday. Does that make sense? So as these laws change, as laws become new or updated, I can't go and say, hey, guess what? I'm arresting you today for something that was perfectly legal yesterday. That makes sense that that's a pretty important protection to have. Due process. Man, we've explained it a bunch of times. Due process is so important. It shows up in our Constitution or the Bill of Rights twice. It's mentioned in both the 5th and 14th Amendments. Due process is this idea that the government owes you this series of protections to protect your rights. And due process means the government has to follow all these procedures, protect all your rights for every person, every time. So among your due process rights are the police need probable cause and a search warrant before they arrest you. When you're arrested, you're read your rights. You have the right of habeas corpus. You have to be brought before a judge and these charges have to be told to you. Then you have rights to attorney, you have a rights to a fair trial, and that trial should be speedy, and et cetera, et cetera. All these things are the whole idea of due process. You get them all every single time for every single citizen. We don't take shortcuts. We don't say, ooh, we arrested this person, but they're a terrorist. Guess what? Terrorists are terrible and horrible and a threat to all our safety. So guess what? Maybe they don't get a lawyer. Or maybe they don't get a fair trial, or a speedy trial, or a public trial. That would be against our due process rights if the government tried to do that. Does that make sense, Abby?
Yeah.
Why do we hear about due process rights twice? Comes up with the writing of the Constitution in the 5th Amendment. And then it comes up again in the 14th Amendment because we as a nation realized that a whole group of people weren't getting their due process rights, slaves and African Americans. So after the Civil War, the 14th Amendment comes out and it covers several things, but one of the things the 14th Amendment says, hey, seriously, no kidding, for real, everyone gets these due process protections, not just our Caucasian or white citizens. Does that all make sense?
Mm-hmm.
A basic right of the accused is that you're innocent until proven guilty. And that can be pretty hard for the system and for us as citizens to really do fairly. Because if somebody gets arrested for some terrible crime, automatically you were thinking, gee, they wouldn't have been arrested if they're not guilty. Particularly when the police and the prosecutors bring these people out and they're already in a jumpsuit and they're chained and shackled. And usually, are you looking your best? No. You're looking intimidated, scared, tired. You haven't had a chance to put your makeup on, shave, comb your hair, brush your teeth. And they're shuffling you in front of the TV cameras. Do you look like you're probably a serial killer, terrible person? Do you look guilty?
Yeah.
Yes. So we have to force ourselves to remember, no, that person is innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Until that person is given all their due process rights, to include that speedy, public, and fair trial, it's only those 12 citizens on the jury that say, yes, you're guilty, you're innocent up to that point. Abby.
I always thought like innocent until proven guilty was just like a legal term. So like people that haven't been convicted yet as like guilty, they are treated as if they're innocent by law. Like they can't be jailed until they're proven guilty. I never thought it was like a public thing where the public is supposed to believe everyone's innocent until proven guilty.
Right. It is a legal thing. You're exactly right. I, though, like to bring out the point that we should all remember that as citizens. Because most of the time, are we going to be arrested? Are we going to be going through this process? Hopefully, most of us won't. Okay? But as citizens, and in understanding this system, I want us to all think about the impacts of not just that they get these legal protections, but in our minds. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes, these are all legal protections, but I want to think of us as citizens, as people who are smart civically, to remember that these things have a meaning. These are protections for me if I ever get arrested, but it's good for me to remember when I'm watching the news and I see somebody in chains, the police are walking them into the courtroom, I say, hey, that person is not a murderer yet. They're just a suspect. They are innocent until that trial is done and that jury says they're guilty. Okay? Now, are they really guilty maybe in the fact that they actually did it? Maybe not. You could be convicted of a crime you didn't do. But this is all about making sure that person gets all those rights. They get their rights protected. They go through the entire process of this system. They get their due process rights, and they're not considered guilty until the foreman of the jury says guilty.
But sometimes people that are guilty don't get arrested for it and they're proven innocent. Which
It
is
works.
like why it's hard to always be like, oh yeah, that person is innocent and then they're just let off the hook. And
It is complicated, and it does work both ways. Are there guilty people in jail? Yes. Are there people who were called guilty by a court and they're in jail, and of course they did nothing wrong?
yeah.
Are there people who did the crime but received an unfair trial somehow, shouldn't have been found guilty, but are in jail? Yes. So you got every possible combination and permutation there, sitting in that final product of the prison system. Are there really, no kidding, guilty people who were there because they deserved it? They did it, they were found guilty in jail? Yes. Are there purely innocent people in jail? Yes. Are there people who did the crime but had an unfair trial, are found guilty or in jail? Yes. One of the ways that we protect ourselves is we have this process called appeals. So if the trial or the jury finds you guilty, you still have some options left to continue to plead your innocence and continue to make sure your rights are protected. So, Abigail, if you are found guilty, you're shackled and they take you to a prison, you still have the right to appeal that verdict. You can argue to a higher level of court, hey, I am innocent because the judge made a mistake in my trial. My rights weren't fully protected. You don't get appeals just because you don't like the outcome. You do have the right and protection to argue your case and say, hey, look, I'm in jail right now, but I'm innocent. There was some error in the law in my case, and I should not have been found guilty and put in prison.
Does it work the other way too? Like if, say someone went to trial for murder and like it was a family member that, so like the family is there, can the family appeal it if that person is found not guilty? So can they be like, hey, we want a retrial because we know this person is guilty, but they weren't found guilty?
This may be the next slide. Hold on. It's coming up though. That's called double jeopardy. Double jeopardy. Remind me to go back. Double jeopardy says you could only be tried once for that crime. So if the police arrest you for that crime, you were found innocent, it is done. They cannot rearrest you for that same crime.
But what if they get, like...
What if they mess up, they make a mistake?
Yeah.
They do
can't
a poor
just
job?
let a murderer go.
They not only can, they have to. This is why the government really needs to do a good job. They need to only arrest people that they have real evidence on, that they can prove their case in trial. Because if there wasn't this thing called double jeopardy, what could the government do? The government's like, gee, I think Abby murdered somebody. I don't really have good evidence, but I think she did it. I'm going to arrest her. I'm going to take her to trial. And if I mess it up, I'll do it again. And if I mess up, I'll do it again. This forces the government, which is hugely powerful, to do their absolute best job in finding people who are truly the people who did it and finding the evidence that they are guilty of that crime. Otherwise, it would be easy to be police or be a prosecutor. Yeah, frankly, this is what I do. I find somebody I think's a suspect, I arrest them immediately, and I put them on trial. And if it doesn't work, if they're found innocent, I arrest them again and put them on trial again. And if it doesn't work, I arrest them and put them on trial again. And in all this time, I try to find more witnesses, I try to find more evidence. No, this is one of your most important protections. It forces the police and government to do their best possible job and present their best possible case if they're going to take your freedom and liberty away from you. And if they mess it up, you're free. That is a critical protection, but I can see why people get upset about that.
Do you think that's sometimes that's the reason why innocent people get convicted as guilty? Because, like, some people may be like, okay, well, if they actually are guilty and we just don't have the evidence enough to prove it, we're just going to say they're guilty and put them in jail?
I mean, absolutely. And it's tough for a juror, too. Most people grow up in this system and they're like, gee, I trust the police, I trust the government, I trust the courts. I'm sitting here as a juror. I'm supposed to be doing this job as this neutral person, but for most citizens, I wouldn't be surprised if they're sitting there in the jury box and like, well, I mean, this evidence is weak, but I'm sure the police know what they're doing. They wouldn't have arrested this person if they weren't guilty. That's why this presumption of innocence is so important. That's why jurors need to be doing their job very rigorously. Because it's so easy for you to sit there and say, yeah, man, that person looks horrible. They look like a terrible person. And why would the police arrest him? I'm sure if the police took the time to arrest him, and I'm sitting here in a courtroom, yeah, they probably did it. You got to force yourself to remember, no, this person is innocent until the government proves to me they are guilty with evidence. And that's why double jeopardy is this key protection. It would be easy. I'm the police, I just like arrest this person and keep bringing them to trial until I get it right? No. So, to go to our absolute first slide, a lot of Americans who lived during this time period said yes. O.J. Simpson murdered 2 human beings, there's no doubt about it. But he was found innocent during the trial. If you don't remember the O.J. Simpson case, he basically murders his ex-wife, and he's accused of murdering his ex-wife and his ex-wife's boyfriend. O.J. Simpson, who is he? Maybe you didn't hear of him. He was a college and pro football superstar. After his pro football career, which of course he's what makes lots of money, becomes very famous, he does all kinds of commercials, he's in TV and movies. So he becomes a entertainment celebrity too. So he's fabulously wealthy, particularly compared to you and me. He is known across the country. He's beloved. He's not just like a celebrity where you like may have mixed feelings about him. Most people thought O.J. Simpson, great guy. He gets arrested, suspected of 2 counts of murder. There's this long involved trial that's constantly in the media. At the end of it, he's found innocent. Just imagine, Abby, at the end of that, the police saying, oh man, we didn't like that answer. So as soon as he walks down the courthouse steps going to freedom, they snatch him up and arrest him again. And they say, why am I being arrested? Well, we really, 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 really think you murdered 2 people. Well, you had the chance to prove that, government. Yeah, but we messed it up. We want another try.
Mm-hmm.
So you're innocent. Did that dog eat the lipstick?
Maybe.
Probably. But if this is a human being, we want to give this human being every possible chance that they can retain their freedom. Because if we're going to put this person in jail for 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years of their life, we need to make sure we give them every possible legal protection before we do that. Right? Fourth Amendment, all about illegal searches and seizures. You're protected from the government. Government can't just smash down your door, go in your house, and start looking for evidence of a crime. If they could, again, it would be really easy. They'd do it. Yeah, we think this Abby's a criminal, so let's just kick in her door and look for evidence. Well, no. They need to have probable cause. They need to bring all this probable cause to a judge who acts as a neutral, disinterested party, and that judge gives the police a search warrant, and only then can the police go into your private residence, go through your private property to find evidence of a crime. And then that gets strengthened with this case called Chap versus Ohio. This is the exclusionary rule. This case says if the police do find evidence of a crime in your house, but they find it because they either ignored a search warrant or had a bad search warrant, that evidence is excluded or disappears, which hopefully seems fair. I mean, it's hard to get your brain wrapped around that. Police kick down Abby's door. They go in her house and they find, no kidding, 200 pounds of cocaine in there. You can't miss it. It's 200 pounds of cocaine. It's there. You can't wish it or imagine it away. So now Abby goes on trial. Her lawyer argues that was an illegal search. And guess what? Maybe it was. Maybe the police didn't have a search warrant at all, or they had a bad search warrant. Chap versus Ohio says now that evidence is excluded. And it's hard to get your mind wrapped around it. You're like, hold on, I'm supposed to ignore 200 pounds of cocaine. It's right there, I can see it, I can put my hands on it. And we ignore that? Chap versus Ohio says, yes, you have to. It's like it never existed. Bye-bye.
Even if it's like a pile of dead bodies?
Even if it's a pile of dead bodies.
Of children? They'd ignore it?
Chap versus Ohio would say yes if the police did not have proper search warrant, proper authorization to search. They cannot use that evidence. Now, what would the police do? They would try to back up with other evidence. And it's going to be challenging for them, but it's purposely meant to be challenging because it's purposely there to protect your rights, or otherwise, what would the police probably wind up doing? Just going to people's houses. Ah, look, I found this. You're under arrest.
But I feel like this is like it's a good rule, and it probably helps a lot of people in their trial process, but like, wouldn't it just give the jury and also even like the judge like a bias? Because if they know that 200 pounds of cocaine was found in their house and it's the only other evidence they have is weak, wouldn't they probably just arrest them anyways, even with that weak evidence, because they know that
by
it's
the
there?
exclusionary rule, the defense lawyers would try to bring this up before the trial starts. So, I'm your defense attorney. I talk with you, I look at the evidence, I look at the police, and before the trial I'm doing this, and I say, hey, Abby, did they show you a search warrant? And you're like, no. All they did is they smashed the door in with a hammer, they threw flashbang grenades in. Next thing I know, I'm laying in the floor getting zip tied. So you never saw a search warrant? Nope. Then I do my research, I find a search warrant never existed. I would use the exclusionary rule preferably before the trial. I would go to the judge and prosecutor and say, hey, look, you got to get rid of this 200 pounds of cocaine, because the only reason why the police ever found it is by an illegal search. So yes, you hope you bring all this stuff up before trial, because yeah, it could be awkward at trial. 12 jurors are now supposed to wipe from their brains 200 pounds of cocaine.
Yeah.
Some jurors might have a hard time doing that.
What
But even if it happens during the trial, the judge should be ruling this way, and the judge would tell the jury, hey jury, guess what? That 200 pounds of cocaine, forget about it. Erase it from your brain. And it's going to be hard for some jurors to do.
What if they if they illegally search and they don't find anything, what would happen to the people that illegally searched their house?
Depends on the police agency. And you could sue them in civil court later. But it depends on the police agency involved. You would hope the police police themselves, and if their police are doing a poor job, that would be addressed. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. Just happened in Georgia. There was a big shooting. Police break open a door, go in the house, shoot 2 people in there. Now the people were shooting back at the police. So the police break in the door, there's a gunfight. They kill the 2 people in the house. Police officers are injured during the gunfight. It turns out the police had bad search warrant. This happened in Atlanta, and Atlanta did wind up punishing these police officers involved. Fifth Amendment gives you lots of protections. The key one we want to focus on here is you have the right to remain silent. You don't have to tell the police or courts anything at all. You don't have to say anything. Why? Because anything you could say could be used as evidence against you, and you wind up putting yourself in jail. Where does this come from? Supreme Court. It's called the Miranda decision. This guy, Miranda, gets arrested. He winds up confessing to a bunch of crimes. He goes to jail. Later in jail, he's working with his lawyer, and he's like, you know what? I didn't know I didn't have to tell the police this stuff. They never told me what my rights were. The only reason why I confessed to anything is because I didn't understand my rights. So he appeals, it goes to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court says, yes, guess what, police? You have to make sure the people you arrest understand their rights. So now every police show you see, I'm sure you're familiar with the Miranda warning. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say or do can be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney, blah, blah, blah. And it all comes down to the Supreme Court decision, this guy named Miranda. Double jeopardy, we talked about it. The police and the courts have only one shot of putting you in jail for that crime. And this comes up, so if I get found innocent of murder, I could just murder people like every day. No, just that one specific act of that crime. It's not like you're found innocent of one murder, you can just keep murdering people. Just that specific act. Sixth Amendment. Sixth Amendment has a lot of stuff in there, all about your trial rights. The one we want to reinforce here is Sixth Amendment says you get a lawyer. And if you're poor, you have no money, Abby, you're a homeless person, you don't have any money at all, much less money to hire a lawyer, what happens in that case?
The state gives you a lawyer?
The state provides you a lawyer. Do you get a good lawyer, maybe?
Not all, no.
You get whatever the state provides, and that state means the government. So it's going to be different from local, state, and federal governments. And every place does it differently. Some states have any lawyer that lives in their jurisdiction spend volunteer time defending criminal clients. Some have an organization called the Public Defender's Office, people that actually work for the state, and that's their whole job, is to defend clients who are accused of crimes that don't have the money to hire their own lawyers. Some states do it well, some states do it poorly. There are some states who've been sued because they do their public defender system poorly. And usually poorly means they don't give the public defender system any money, so the public defender system can't hire enough lawyers, or the only lawyers they could hire are like kids fresh out of law school. Oh, hi, I'm Steve. I've never done this before. I'm your lawyer. I hope I don't mess up and you go to jail for the rest of your life. Pretty bad. If you're rich, do you have to worry about this at all?
Oh, no.
If you're rich, do you get the best lawyers in the world?
Mm-hmm.
O.J. Simpson case, that's another facet of it. He was able to hire like 6 of the best criminal defense attorneys in the United States. And he was able to pay for expert witnesses to help him in his case. So is that one of the many reasons why he was able to be found innocent in that case? Yes. If a normal person murdered 2 people, would they be able to afford 6 of the best defense attorneys in the United States?
No.
So Gideon versus Wainwright, important Supreme Court case that says, hey, look, if we're going to do this right, if we're going to really stick to the 6th Amendment, we have to provide you with an attorney if you can afford it. Otherwise, everybody who's too poor to afford an attorney, they're going to be in big trouble. And they wouldn't get the full protection of the law.
You can be your own lawyer, right?
You can. And there's a saying in law, anybody who represents themselves has a fool for a client, meaning it's a bad idea to try to defend yourself, even if you're a fully trained lawyer. Why? You may not be an expert in that type of law, or you can't divorce yourself from your own situation. You're not using logic, you're using too much emotion. It's hard for you to do this properly. So most people say, whatever you do, never try to defend yourself. And most judges basically won't let you. Most judges know if they let you defend yourself, that could be overturned in an appeal. Because that would be the perfect grounds for appeal in the world. Hey, I was found guilty because I represented myself and I'm an idiot. I didn't know what I was doing. So most judges will say, I know what you're trying to do. And they'll force a lawyer to sit next to you and say, hey, Abigail Biankowski, you do have the right to defend yourself. Go for it. But I don't care how much you protest or argue, there's a lawyer sitting right next to you. And that lawyer's going to be saying stuff to you. You can listen to it or not. But what you're not going to do is 6 months from now, write an appeal and say, I didn't give you your rights, that you're guilty because you're a knucklehead and defended yourself. Nope. I'm covering my bases by making a lawyer sit next to you the entire trial. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, judges have figured this stuff out. Plea bargains. Plea bargains are really important. Most people never go to trial. Most people are presented with a bargain or a deal. The government, the prosecutor says, hey, Abby, here's the deal. I arrested you and I'm going to charge you with murder. You're going to spend at least 30 years in jail, probably the rest of your life. Or, if you say you're guilty right now, I'll only charge you with involuntary manslaughter. You go to jail for 15 years. You skip the expense and time of the trial process, and then the government doesn't have that embarrassing thing where they lose a trial and you go free. So they do this thing called a plea bargain. They'll say, hey, look, say you're guilty of a lesser charge. We don't go through the trial. I get my win. I put you in jail. You're guilty. And you get something too. Gee, instead of the death penalty, I go to jail for 15 years. That makes sense? Mm-hmm. Some people think this is a wonderful thing. Some people think it's a tremendous potential violation of your rights. Why? You have innocent people who will take a plea bargain and say, I'd rather go to jail for 5 years than 30, whether they did the crime or not, which is a horrible, horrible thing, but things some people are basically forced to do. 8th Amendment, no cruel and unusual punishment, no excessive fines or bail set. Furman versus Georgia is a Supreme Court case that said in the 70s, the death penalty is unconstitutional because it is cruel and unusual. Now, states after this rewrote their laws so they could have the death penalty back, but for a good period of time in the United States, the death penalty was declared unconstitutional. Why? It wasn't being applied fairly. It violated people's 5th and 14th Amendment rights. They really looked at things like it disproportionately was used for minorities. But most states that wanted the death penalty rewrote their laws and fixed those problems the Supreme Court mentioned in Furman versus Georgia. So now about half the states have the death penalty and half don't. Some good links. Your review questions. Have a great day.